Well, welcome everyone. Hello. This is the first of 7 reflection sessions that are sponsored by the Catholic Bishops of Alberta and the Northwest Territories. My name is Bonnie Annicchiarico. I am Director of GRACE, the Grateful Advocates for Catholic Education here in Alberta, and it's my pleasure to serve as the moderator for today's panel discussion. This panel is part of a series of reflection sessions inspired by a pastoral letter released by our bishops on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross. The letter was titled, "Save Your People, O Lord, and Bless Your Inheritance," a pastoral statement on the impact of COVID-19 and the call to Christian renewal. In their pastoral letter, the bishops invite Catholics from around the province and territories to review the impact of COVID-19 within their homes, schools, workplaces, and society in general, especially in light of the gospel and the social teachings of the Church. For example, questions like, how have you lived your faith during this time of pandemic? Which values, attitudes, and behaviors have been most dear to you and will you want to hold on to going forward? And also, which may be in need of remedy or renewal? These are the questions we want to engage our panelists here today. Today's specific reflection topic is the inherent dignity of every human life. To help guide our reflection on this theme, we have assembled an exceptional panel of Catholic leaders in specific ministry fields that touch upon the theme directly and have been impacted by the pandemic in particular ways. Joining me in conversation today are Mr. Patrick Dumelie, Chief Executive Officer of Covenant Health in Alberta. Want to wave, Patrick? Thank you. Dr. Troy Davies, Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Social Services in Edmonton. Welcome. Mr. David and Mrs. Cathy Bouchard, a couple hailing from Red Deer who have inspired countless others through their shared passion for faith, family, education, and social justice. Welcome. And Sister Alinda, who is the local Mother Superior of the Missionaries of Charity in St. Paul, Alberta. Welcome, Sister.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by quoting the Bishop's reflection text on today's theme. Our bishops write, "A key insight to emerge out of COVID-19 crisis is the necessity to pay close care and attention to our personal health and to the well-being of others. Washing hands, wearing personal protective equipment, keeping physical distance, sanitizing spaces, checking in on family members and neighbors, packing food parcels, tuning into the latest reports from health officials. All of these measures were quickly adopted in order to safeguard the physical and mental well-being of ourselves and the people around us. At the same time, the virus has exposed certain frailties in the way that we as a society care for our elderly persons, homeless individuals, and other vulnerable populations, particularly within our healthcare and social services infrastructure. Systematic and chronic underfunding for long-term care and nursing homes, insufficient support for healthcare workers and facilities, inadequate or overcrowded housing in certain communities. All of these realities point to social situations and attitudes that erode human dignity and call for some measure of societal reform." So with the background provided for us by the bishops, I'd like to begin with our first question for the panel today. How have your experiences through the pandemic awakened your sense of gratitude, affection, and responsibility towards all people, particularly the most vulnerable in our society? Who'd like to begin the discussion?
I can start.
Sister?
Yes. During this pandemic, I had gone for my retreat to New Mexico, Gallup. And I was in March, went for the retreat, and I couldn't get back to Canada till in June because I couldn't get back home because we had lockdown. So I worked with our sisters in New Mexico. We ran the soup kitchen and a night shelter. And we didn't close down during the pandemic, even though New Mexico was affected more than any other places, because we had a lot of our men were affected with the COVID. And what really happened was we thought if we let them out on the streets, they were going to spread it out for everybody. So we thought we let them come in and eat the food, and the sisters, we take the precautions. We had our gloves and mask and whatever we need to do, we done. And then we took the people in and some of the help of the volunteers. So they came and we sisters served the food for the people, and we took many of our men to the shelter. But we spaced it. We could not like every time take him. We had taken we have the facility for the people to take like about 60 beds, but then we minus that one to 30, so that they have the enough space for them, so that they will not catch up. So, and also the main intention was if someone has any symptoms of the COVID, we right away took them to the hospital. So we had the helpers as the doctors and nurses and everybody came to help us in the work in that time. And I felt it is really good because that opened more people to come and help us and in the work.
So sister, through that experience, did you have any deeper sense of responsibility or affection for the people that you were working with?
Yes, our people were the most vulnerable people because our people are the street people, and they are drug addicts and alcoholics, and they couldn't get back home either because their families were not accepting them in that moment because of the COVID. So we are the only people who could take them in. So
I'm so glad that you were there, sister.
Yeah, so that they felt it that the home in the St. Joseph shelter was their home. They could come and they have the meal to eat and they could stay in one place.
Thank you, sister. Are there some others on the panel that would like to comment on that question?
That's the way in, Bonnie. I think for me, in terms of the gratitude, it was really, reaffirming the privilege it is to be part of a Catholic health organization such as Covenant. What we've seen in terms of the sacrifice of our staff and the resilience and them coming together to support each other really, for us, was our mission personified. And so we think about our mission of selflessly serving others and those who are most vulnerable and trying to bring the marginalized to the core while respecting the dignity of the human person. It was so evident in our organization. The staff were scared at the beginning. They didn't know, what the effects were, but they showed up every single day, making sure everybody got the care that they needed, making sure the plans were in place, and most importantly, supporting each other in a way to make sure that they could not only care for the individuals who are coming through the door and be prepared for what was next, but also to support them, their family life. And, many staff had children who were affected or senior elderly parents or those, those who might be most affected by the virus. So, see that in action the way that we saw it in our organization, for me was really affirming, of the strength of the mission and the strength of Catholic healthcare. We saw, we kind of joked a little bit that we didn't fear the virus. What we feared was the medical officer of health's press conference at Friday at 4:00, because it seemed like that's when all the major change would happen. And, we just saw people rally together to make the necessary changes to ensure people were safe and to ensure we were prepared. And there's thousands of hours and weekends given up and evenings and nights. And, so to see that commitment of our teams to, those who are most vulnerable, again, was really reaffirming for me. And, really, for me, helped ensure that, the special gift of Catholic healthcare was, front and center as a privilege for me. Thanks, personally.
Patrick. Thank you. One of the things I hear in common between what you're saying and what Sister Alinda is saying is the team that was working together, the community that you were building as you met the needs in New Mexico or through Catholic healthcare. You just really need each other during times like that as well. Other comments from our panel?
In times of crisis, you really see the values an organization and the purpose and alignment of people who are called to serve with the mission and the ministry of the church. And for me, that's really affirming.
Thank you. Anyone
For
else?
us, I would say the first point of gratitude is that our adult children checked in and said, you must take care of yourself. And we usually are reaching out to others and going out, so that we appreciated that they wanted us to take care of ourselves. The next thing we were involved with was phoning people that were vulnerable. So the Knights of Columbus had Leave No Neighbor Behind.
Yeah.
So the Knights divided up the names of all the Knights to call them. And that led us to calling other people that we knew were vulnerable, not necessarily seniors, but those who were alone. And that connected us with people that we don't usually connect with. If we see them in person, then we connect, but in this age of social media, we don't phone as much. And I think that was something I think we're going to be doing more of, David and I, for sure.
Thank you. Troy, did you have anything to add?
Sure. Just with respect to the three components of your question there about gratitude, affection, and responsibility, and I would say here that at Catholic Social Services, our sense of urgency around all of those three has been heightened by COVID. There's a lot of very vulnerable people that are relying on you. Your staff is relying on you, and you don't want to let people down. And I just know that, here, there's just such gratitude that I know I have, and that so many people have for our frontline workers, working with our vulnerable clients in our various facilities, that these are quiet heroes that are doing heroic work out in the field. And I think another thing that's been heightened for me is just with the stories that you hear, is you realize how particularized love is, because we can sometimes think of it in kind of generic and general terms, and then the stories that you hear just make so real moments of true, genuine love, where someone is being cared for. And I just think that I guess the last thing I would offer here is that with that sense of responsibility, I think one of the things that's been a little bit disquieting for me anyhow, is realizing that not everybody is resourced to the same way to handle this pandemic. I've heard it said, and I think it hits the nail on the head in terms of we may all be in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And that can be a little bit, like I said, it can be disquieting.
Absolutely. One of the questions I was wondering about is all these experiences you've had, did they feel like you were really having to make sacrifices, or was there something joyful or positive in your reaction to what was taking place? Sister?
For us, it was a very joyful way to do the things. It was not at all a sacrifice or burdensome, but it was very joyful. I saw all the sisters were so happy to do that. We have to go. We are going soon to do. We have to take care of our people. So nobody was like, oh, why we have to go, why we have to do this. We are also afraid of. None of the sisters were afraid. We were very young sisters, but everybody's in the front line to jump in to go, and it was a very joyful way to do the service to the others.
Thank you, sister. Does anyone else have a comment on that?
I think something being joyful and something being sacrificial aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
That's
right?
right.
It can be a joyful sacrifice. It can be joyfully sacrificial to know that by my wearing a mask, I'm making it safer for somebody else. By my washing my hands regularly, I'm making things safer for somebody else. So it's both sacrificial and joyful, I think, at the same time.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to question 2. So what have you realized about the dignity of human life through your pandemic experiences? Troy, could I start with you?
Sure. I think that, amongst many other things, I think the pandemic has taught me, much like any suffering, that suffering can be a time that can be very fruitful for learning about deep truths. I just think in my own life, the moments in my own life where I've learned the most and have grown the most haven't been through times of ease and comfort. They've been through times of trial and deep suffering and struggle. And I think if I had to pick one lesson above all else that this has taught me, and it's not at a sort of a cognitive or cerebral level, it's at a very gut level and a visceral level. And it's just that above all else, life is holy. And everything that we're doing is worth it, because all of these, they're more than just health undertakings or social distancing, whatever. They're sacred undertakings as well, because ultimately what we're trying to protect are lives, and every life is sacred and every life is holy.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yes, David.
I think one of the things that concerns me, I guess, the most with regard to the dignity of other people is that there are always going to be people who say the rules don't apply to me. And so I think that's one of the things that I noticed a lot in our own little area of Red Deer, that when we were going on our walks, our daily walks, which we picked up as a result of the pandemic, we would notice that people would actually step off the sidewalk onto the grass and let me go by, or vice versa. And so that was kind of a neat experience to do that. And we always greeted one another, and it was often different people. And it just livened my spirit to recognize that there's lots of people here in Red Deer, even though I don't know them, that we can really become quite cordial. And I thought that was kind of a neat experience, but it still concerned me that there was still people who, in spite of all of the scientific information we were getting on a daily basis, they just continued to ignore it. So I pray for them. That's one of the things that came out of that, was that during our morning prayer, we would always include people to be able to have an open attitude to a proper response to this pandemic.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, in addition to what's already been said, which I think is really well said, I think for me, the issue of human dignity, it really taught us, how human we really all are and how vulnerable we are, and how each of us comes with our warts and bumps and lumps, but there's many pressures, whether that is a pressure in the work that you do or supporting your family. And so I think it also taught us a little bit about how fragile life really is, and for everyone in our community, how things can change in a heartbeat. I think about how anxious our staff was at the beginning, trying to deal with, what was largely unknown, how the virus would affect the population, and who would need hospitalization and who would need intubation and ICU and all of that piece. But, all that playing out with the demands of not only caring for people in the hospitals or in our seniors care facilities, caring for, as I said before, their elderly parents, and trying to make arrangement for their children. And for me, the thing that was so amazing was the way that people rallied around each other. Just spontaneously, the staff started a Facebook page that was really just designed to, if you had a problem, you had a need, you couldn't cope with the stress, that they would just reach out to each other and fulfill that need. And so for me, that was something that was truly remarkable, in the midst of all of this chaos, that people were really reaching out, and it didn't matter who it was. It could be, a VP or somebody on the front line or somebody in the sports service area were rallying to support each other, which again was just nothing short of heartwarming.
Beautiful. Thanks, Patrick. Sister, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was surprised to see many people's charity during this pandemic, because people were so open and they were really trying to help out whatever they could. Some people some homebound people, they could make masks, and they made so many masks and they gave it to the people. So that was their way of showing that we are participating in this, what is going on. And people, they really tried to do as much as they can. They provided some they bought the gloves, some they brought the masks, some they brought some hand sanitizers, whatever they could do. And also they were helping many other ways too. And they were not concerned about, oh, we can't go to the people to give out these things. But they were also risking in a way to say their life for to get the virus. But they were also that was in their part, it was a sacrifice to go and to do something more. And I was very happy to see the people were so concerned about it.
It sounds like, Sister, that's something that you weren't expecting and that you were surprised about. I'd just like to ask the rest of the panel, was there something that caught you by surprise when you were experiencing the pandemic, when you reflect on the dignity of human persons? What kind of will be a takeaway that just really surprised you?
Yeah, much surprised me was the priest who went to give the last sacraments to those who were affected with the coronavirus. We had some of the priests had gone, and they knew that the person is having, they diagnosed as the coronavirus, and they did not hesitate to go and administer them the sacrament in the hospital.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think one of the things that surprised me, we've had 4 or 5 funerals that we have been part of during COVID, and the simplicity that the funerals could come to. So the sacrament itself was much simpler, with fewer people and less singing. It was just the basics of the sacrament, and it was very moving how what was really important was what came up, rather than all the exterior trappings.
I like that. That's beautiful.
I guess for us, Bonnie, I mean, one thing I don't know if it's really surprising, because I never cease to be amazed by just how generous people are. But I know that, a portion of our work here at CSS, not a really large portion, but a really significant portion and a really important portion, relies completely on donor support. And so we did a special donor appeal in the midst of COVID, so that we could generate extra funds for people who desperately need it, and our goal was exceeded. And that was just a really joy-filled moment. I'm just, again, my heart is always overwhelmed by just how generous people are and how willing they are to step in and step up when a need is presented with them.
So good to hear. Absolutely. I'd like to go on to question 3. So we're moving our thoughts now from our own personal experiences into our thoughts about the church. And what role does the church play regarding your understanding and insights on human dignity? And I noticed, Cathy, you spoke to the simplicity of the funerals during that time, which is a role for the church. Maybe we could start with you and David.
I'm sorry. So one of the things to think about is that the church is not the building. With a number of times, for a good amount of time, we attended Mass online. But as people reached out, we more realized that we are the people, we are the church, and we are in communion with each other. And that's such a deep understanding that I think we might have gotten from this pandemic, that we are people of God together, all of us worldwide. We're all depending on each other. And I think to understand that communion of each other was so important to relearn, we'll say, from the pandemic. I think that was really important.
I think the church has a prophetic voice in terms of being able to draw us all together in terms of our response to making sure that we make the choices that respect human dignity. So when, for instance, we've heard about the events in some places where the elderly were being neglected and not cared for, and there was a bit of an outcry as regard to that. And I think that's when I heard, people making comments. And again, we look at the church from all perspectives, the lay and the hierarchical as well. But to speak out on those kind of issues is really important for the church to take that initiative and to say what really is the gospel mandate for us to be able to respond to the dignity of all people.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Cathy and David. For me, as I think about the church's role in this, and having a prayer as a source of hope, even though the churches themselves were, we couldn't enter them. I think and it was the way the church responded to that. To have us join in prayer and create that sense of hope was really important. The church also teaches us to live out our gospel values, which I think in our organization, social services, and across the entire church, that was was so evident. And then when we think of then the service that we provide, I was happened to be at Catholic Social Services board meeting last night, and we were talking about how many agencies close their doors to those who are homeless or most vulnerable, and Catholic Social Services and Covenant as well. That doesn't even cross our mind. It's how are we going to deliver the service in a new way that's safe for everybody, but meets the needs of those who are vulnerable. And so for me, I'm very proud of that. But I also think the church continue to remind us that every single life matters, and we have the Black Lives Matter movement happening among us, and reminding us that we're all created in God's likeness, and that dignity of person is at the root of that. And for me, that's the real source of strength of the church and its ministries is coming together with hope and prayer and living good values and service, no matter what the circumstances. And for me, that's inspiring.
Thank you, Patrick.
I'd say, Bonnie, that the role of the church is absolutely instrumental and foundational in terms of my own understanding of human dignity. I know it's something that can cross your religious lines, but that's where it's grounded for me. It's all grounded in that idea, of course, that we are created in the image and likeness of God. Humans are essentially icons of God, and what I like to think about is that if we're made in his image and likeness, well, who is that God? That God for us, our church teaches, is a Trinitarian God, right? And what the Trinity, as we know, means one God made up of three persons. So God himself is a community of persons in perfect relationship with one another. So to me, that means that our human dignity, and Cathy and David kind of alluded to this earlier, but that our human dignity is most borne out when we're in loving relationships and we're in communion and community with one another. And I just think when that happens, God looks down on us with complete delight. And it's the universality and the indestructibility of human dignity is it's like God. It's eternal. There's nothing that can ever be done that can ever take that gift of our human dignity away. And I think that's a beautiful message for the church, from the church for the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Troy. Sister, did you want to add to that about how the church has played a role in what you've seen during the pandemic?
For me, the church, we are created in the image and likeness of God. And so the church, if I am created in the image and likeness of God, I will see my other brothers and sisters. They are also created in the image and likeness of God. So I treat them, if I am respecting myself, and I will respect the others. And so the church is really want us to do that, in a way to say, the church is looking forward how we can do more for our people. How do we respect? The Holy Father always speaks about non-violence, no violence, all those things. But how do we, my part, Mother Teresa always says, peace begin with a smile. With that, Mother always taught us, sisters, doesn't matter how deformed a person is, with your smile, with your kindness, you can bring up that dignity of that person. So I had served in India with the lepers, with all kinds of different sicknesses. And then Mother is the first one who opened the AIDS home in New York. That nobody took the AIDS patient or took care of. But Mother is the first one who came to New York and took care of the AIDS patients. And so in seeing in each person the dignity of one who created in the image and likeness of God.
Yes, thank you, sister. I don't know if I'm supposed to comment, but I kind of feel called to right now too. I just see the strength of our church in terms of being really relevant right now. When we were going through what has been our lives in the last 5 to 6 months, I just kept coming back to, well, this is, the church believes this. This is where the strength is coming from. The people who are hopeful, the people that are doing okay despite the challenges, are those with faith and those that know there's a bigger picture. And we just have an opportunity to make all that we believe and know about our faith in the church just so relevant right now. And I'm using that in conversations I'm having with people that aren't of faith or in my own family, because I just feel that there's just such a depth there. And I just wonder if anyone else would like to comment on what some of the strengths are that our church brings during this time.
I think one thing above all else, Bonnie, is just that our church has such a strong service orientation, right? And I mean, that stems from, you go back to the upper room at the Last Supper, when Jesus got down on his knees and washed dirty feet, right? So, I mean, we follow a person who set for us the purest example of what it means to uphold and honor human dignity by, like, is it getting down on his knees and washing dirty feet? So it's a message for us in our church that, unlike other organizations or other entities, whatever, the church doesn't lead with a sword. It doesn't lead with an agenda. It doesn't lead with its ego. It doesn't lead. The church leads with a towel. It leads with service, right? And I just think, it's a message where we're called to be servants, right? The scriptures himself, when Jesus said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And when we follow Christ to the margins and we follow him to the edges, we're going to encounter Christ there. So to me, that service orientation is just a real strength that the church brings.
Absolutely. David, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I in the April Columbia magazine that the Knights of Columbus put out, they had a prayer for the pandemic. And that's when Cathy and I started praying this prayer every morning. But it was one of the interesting things about the prayer is that it opened up our understanding a little bit about what the role of prayer is with regard to responding to the pandemic, and opened our sense of awareness that other people who are suffering. And what is the thing that this pandemic means? And I'm looking at it because Pope Francis originally wrote the prayer and it was translated for us. The whole sense that the universal church is involved in this whole process. But we as individuals here in Red Deer, we're just choosing to do that prayer. And it inspired me then to do the other things that the Knights of Columbus were talking about in regard to leave no neighbor behind. So I was phoning some of our senior members just to make sure that they're okay, because they're living alone and I'd never done that before. So it was a brand new experience for me, and it was really a rewarding experience in the end. The gratitude that the people had that I was calling was just amazing. It's just thanking me for thinking of them at this particular time. So I was pleased with that whole response. It just made me feel like I was part of that dynamic communion in terms of responding. So just a different initiative in terms of wanting to be able to do something during this difficult time.
And I really appreciate what you're saying about the prayer, that we can turn to prayer always in our good times and our difficult times and find real strength in that. I'm just thinking what your thoughts might be about some of the challenges that the church or limitations that they might have in these kind of situations. Any thoughts?
My first thought is I want to be Cathy and David's neighbor, but Red Deer's a bit of a commute for me to work, but love to have you two as my neighbor, that's for sure. For me, I think in any time of crisis, we talked about the strength of the church, but there's an real opportunity to reflect and look at the role the church needs to play versus some of the limitations in terms of living up to those teachings and certainly the current environment situation. From my perspective, I think the church has a significant identity crisis that's holding it back from actually achieving what we were just talking about. And I think oftentimes the church is really viewed as judgmental and non-inclusive. And in some respects, when we talk about service, and Troy and I have talked about this a lot, we've become very institutionalized within the parishes, within our service organizations. And in some respects, I think we've also lost some of that sense of community that used to surround the church. And some of that, has to do with just modern times and everything else. The church has had to change. It's not always the center of community as it once was maybe decades ago. But I think there's a real opportunity for an awakening for the church coming out of this, that we need a sense of a movement to get back to that sense of community, that healthcare isn't delivered by Covenant Health and social services isn't delivered by Catholic social services. It's delivered by the Catholic community, and engaging that community and fulfilling that sense of purpose and ability to serve and live out the gospel values and create that hope that we talked about, all while coming together in prayer is the modern church that I think that we need, that will allow us to make sure that we that we really live up to that role in creating that human dignity. And so as much holding back from actually achieving what we could. And I think some good work that's happening within our Edmonton Catholic Agencies network to call that out in terms of the identity crisis and the need for more community and engagement of the of our Catholic community to solve some of the major issues within the broader community, I think is something that I hope will come out of the great strength that we've learned we have during this pandemic.
Thank you, Patrick.
Bonnie, I think that one of the limitations of our church is that sometimes I think our church can get too comfortable. And I recall one of Pope Francis's homilies, early on in his pontificate, when he said, "The Holy Spirit should bother us, because the church should always be moving forward." And I think this goes right back to the very beginnings of our church, when you look at the Transfiguration story, when the Transfiguration happened, and Peter, head of the church, said, "It's good for us to be here. Let's get comfortable. Let's put up tents and settle down." And Jesus said, "No, it's not about settling down, and it's about moving forward." And that's the message of Jesus. Jesus has never been about comfort. I mean, a quick reading of the scriptures will tell you that. The cross wasn't meant to be comfortable. So as a Christian, I think we go into this life knowing that it's going to be an uncomfortable life. And as a church, we have to allow ourselves to be unsettled and to be disrupted and to be disturbed by the pain of others, and allow ourselves to be moved by that, and to sometimes go to places where we don't want to go, most notably the margins and the edges.
Well said, Troy. Thank you. The next question I'd like to consider with you is, as church, we desire a society where all human beings, especially the most vulnerable, are loved, cared for, and respected. So then, what must our next actions be? And I think the conversation we are just finishing has a lot of ideas in that direction. But when you think about us as church, what next actions are critical?
I could start, Bonnie, if you
want. Patrick, and then David.
Or you glitched there. Patrick first?
Yes.
When I looked at this question, I was reminded by Pope Francis' comment or quote that, there's two viruses sweeping through the globe, the pandemic, of course, but racism as well. And as we think about the movement that's working, a global movement around racism and discrimination, the impact of COVID has really shone or highlighted that for us in healthcare. If you look at sort of how the pandemic has disproportionately affected individuals, you need to just look at our First Nations and Métis or Indigenous communities and how devastating it is within that community. But disproportionately, we know that homelessness is also our First Nations and Métis community are disproportionately disadvantaged and most vulnerable, and yet that situation continues on. If we look at sort of the workforce within even within healthcare, those who were at home, safe from the virus versus those who are on the front lines. Again, there's a disproportionality between Caucasian and immigrants and others. And you look at who was most affected. A lot of the major outbreaks were because of immigrant and newcomers to our country having to live within, probably congregate settings that wouldn't be the norm in Canadian life. Nor would people be working multiple jobs across multiple organizations and agencies just to have enough means to support their families. So for me, the COVID has really not only shone the light on the fact that our senior system is broken and we've been in need of repair, and we've been talking about that for decades. But the fact that we allow people to remain homeless, and we allow the color of your skin to dictate the outcome that you might get, and especially within the health system, is something that we just need to put our mind to and put an end to. Back to our conversation about the dignity of the human person, and that we're all created in God's image. From my perspective, if you truly believe that, there's no room in our organization for racism, for discrimination, for lack of inclusivity, whether it's systemic or whether it's just blatantly oppressive. And so I think the two things coming out of this is we've learned a lot about ourselves and about society and about coming together, but I think it's also a great opportunity for us to take stock in terms of how we deal with this issue that's prevalent in the community, but also within our very Catholic organizations.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you. David?
In Sacred Heart Parish here in Red Deer, we had meals for the homeless 2 Sundays every month. And of course, when pandemic hit, then we weren't able to do that anymore. So that was not something that they would be able to access. But we never really, at least I never anyway, never thought about how maybe there's another way that we could offer the service. We have a mustard seed community in Red Deer, and almost immediately the response was, well, we can't serve meals in the center, but we can certainly put bag lunches together and then have them available for people. So they just, were able to keep their distance. They were able to come and pick up a bag lunch and go sit on the grass somewhere. I mean, it was nice that it was, summertime for the biggest part, but that's their initiative. They came up with the idea of being able to serve individual meals that they could just take with them because they couldn't have the space. Now, I regret that we never thought of doing that as a parish community. We just kind of shut it down and continued on our way. And I just, that's a concern for me. That I think we have to be a little bit more creative in how we are reaching out to the most vulnerable in our community.
Thanks very much. Troy, did you want to comment on this? In terms of next actions for the church. Sorry, are you on mute?
Sorry, Bonnie, I was. Thank you.
Okay. So what do you think our next actions must be, Troy?
Yeah, so I think that we got to remember that every person matters, no matter what. And I've got a story that I think really epitomizes the essence of your question about the most vulnerable being loved and cared for and respected. It's a pre-pandemic story, but to me it captures the absolute essence of what you're getting at. And that's as at CSS we've got many programs, and there's a number of our programs that serve vulnerable women. Women that are journeying through things that most of us can't even imagine, absolutely tragic lives and circumstances and consequences. And again, this happened just before the pandemic, and one of our staff got a call to come and identify a body, and it's because a woman was found dead on the streets, and the only reason that CSS got the call was because on this woman's person was our business card from CSS. It's literally all she had on her, and we are all that she had in her life. And it made me think that, even in her death, we were able to give her the dignity of her own name, so that she didn't just die as a Jane Doe, that she was somebody that mattered, she was somebody that was important, and she was ultimately somebody who was known. And in this case, known by a staff member at CSS. And I'm just so thankful for that. And yeah, and I think that, you know, what can be the next step of our church, I really think it just boils down to noticing people, especially those who too often are the most invisible amongst us.
Thank you so much. Sister, did you have an idea of what you feel the next steps of our church should be?
What I was thinking, like when the pandemic started, we work with the First Nations here in Alberta, in St. Paul, that two reserve, that is, one is in Saddle Lake, one is in Goldfish Lake. So in Saddle Lake, we couldn't go because it was so hard for us to, they are always locked down in reserve. So it was so hard to get to the people. So we were thinking, Lord, what do you want us to do now? We can't do any of the work. So you show us the way. But we are having holy hour from morning till afternoon. At least we can pray for the people. So the holy hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day. But then suddenly we got a phone call, and we have a second harvest here, and they never did before. Never they called us or never gave us anything. But this time they just got a phone call. We were praying what we have to do for our people. So they called us, sisters, we can't go to the people in Sad Lake or to the Good Fish. Can you do something with this food? Then we community decided, okay, we will take the food. They pick up from vegetables and bread and stuff like that. So we thought, well, how we will get to the people in any case? We have to do something. So we prayed about it. And then we thought we will bring the food in the house and we pack up the food for few families at a time, not to everybody. So we choose like 10 families from one reserve 1 week, and the next week another reserve 10 families. So we take the food to the families to Good Fish Lake and we can drop them off. Not talking too much, or we kept our distance, but we just went and gave it to them, the food basket. And to the Sad Lake people, we could not go to their families. So we thought we will do one thing. We will just call them up in our house. They can come to our house. So we called them up and they came and they pick up the food and go. And we are doing that
wonderful.
still today.
So sometimes we need to just put one foot in front of the other, and with God's guidance, know what's going to come next, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
The Catholic bishops in their recent letter remind us that the Lord allows all occasions to teach and reteach us lessons for right living in light of the gospel. So what do you think the Lord might be saying to his people and his church during this time of pandemic? What lessons is he teaching us?
I think one of the lessons is that we are responsible for each other all across the globe, but then in our own smaller communities, in the people around us. We're responsible for each other, and we're responsible for our church, the people around us. But the church will keep going, keep thriving, as long as we are part of making that happen. So we are all responsible for each other.
Thank you.
I agree with the bishops, Bonnie, that the church does allow, or the Lord does allow occasions like this that we can learn from. But of course, God doesn't cause these occasions. I mean, that's not consistent with who Jesus is, right? He said, I came to give you life. Jesus' whole ministry is about not causing sickness or illness. It's about restoring people from sickness and providing healing. I think that the biggest lesson that I think that the Lord might be trying to teach us during this time is to slow down. It makes me think of the story of the Good Samaritan, where, you know, the man was beaten and robbed and is lying on the road, you know, from Jerusalem to Jericho, and the priest passes him by, the Levite passes him by, and then the Samaritan comes along, the Good Samaritan, and he helps him. And I think sometimes we may be willing to judge the priest and the Levite, that, you know, maybe they were cold and callous and unsympathetic, and maybe that's the case. But it also just could have been a case of maybe they were too busy and they didn't want to let that suffering intrude on their lives. So I think that we need to be mindful that just like in the parable, this pandemic might be inviting us to slow down and notice people on our own roads to Jericho, and be open to the vulnerable people that God might be placing on our path during this time. There's a whole lot more that you can notice when you just take the time to see, right? Which can be very difficult in our world, because our world is filled with a lot of distractions and a lot of noise. And this essence, that busyness is almost something like we wear as a badge of honor. But it's militating against our ability to engage deeply with other people. So I think one of the top lessons to be learned from all this that the Lord might be inviting us into is simply to slow down.
I agree. I hear you. Patrick or sister, would you like to make a comment about what the Lord's teaching us?
Yeah, I spend way too much time with Troy these days, because I wrote down the Good Samaritan parable as well. So we're starting to think too much alike, Troy. But, you know, the only thing I could add, because I think that was very well said, beautifully said, Troy, is, yeah, I think we think of that oftentimes in that parable about us as individuals, and we want to be the Good Samaritan and think that we would not pass someone by. And I think your reflection on taking the time to be present with others and ensure that, you know, we're in our rush, that we're not living out to be the person that we want to be. But I think the same analogy applies to our organizations and our Catholic ministries. You know, that we need to make sure that we don't get caught up in the politics and the budgets and all of the regulations and rules and everything else, and that we pass by that person who needs our assistance and help. And so, you know, for me, I think, you know, it's applying exactly what Troy said about us as individuals to our institutions and organizations and ministries, to simplify a bit and get back to, you know, what is our purpose? And our purpose is to serve others and those who are most vulnerable and marginalized, to bring them to the center and to respect the dignity of human life from, you know, conception to natural death. And, you know, I think my lesson is to make sure we are the Good Samaritan as an organization, and that we don't pass it by because we're distracted by all of the noise that comes with running these big institutions.
I think one of the things that
Thank you, Patrick.
remember
Well said.
reading.
Sister, final word to you. What is the Lord teaching us
Okay.
this time of pandemic?
For me, I was thinking the story of Jesus after the multiplication of the bread. He was going in the boat with his apostles, and he slept, and it was tormented. The sea rose up, but Jesus kept sleeping. He did not wake up, and the apostles were trying their best to straighten up the boat, and they couldn't. And at the end, they woke him up and said, "Don't you care about us?" Then Jesus woke up and calmed the sea, and they wondered who he is. But we can learn from that lesson. Church goes through, in every age, there is a turmoil. There is things happen in the church, but Jesus never leaves us. Jesus is always with us, and we have only to have faith in him. Have faith and surrender to the Lord, and he will take care of everything.
Thank you so much, sister. I have one final question for you, although I'd almost like to leave it on what Sister Alinda has shared with us. But when we think about Pope Francis' statement that faith always requires us to let ourselves be healed and to convert from individualism, both personal and collective. What are your final thoughts about us as individuals challenged by the communal aspects of pandemic and the community of our church. The question of moving from individualism to collective well-being.
So I was going to speak about the document that we got from Pope Francis, where he speaks about living amidst a culture of indifference. That's something not only do we have to learn how to deal with that, but we recognize that we're products of the culture that we're living in. And it's easy for us to become more focused on self and less focused on others. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to do as church. We need to really address that issue of what the culture influence that we have, this culture of indifference. And that's the lesson also that we have to learn, is we can't be indifferent to those that are the most vulnerable in our community. So that was one of the things that I appreciated the most with regard to what the pandemic has taught me. Recognizing in other people what needs they might have, where in other occasions I might just have not even noticed. Now I'm much more aware of those kinds of things. So I'm looking for opportunities rather than avoiding them, I guess. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, David. Thanks so much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think the key word there is exactly as Cathy or as David alluded to. It's indifference. And again, I think with so much noise and so much distraction in our world, and in a culture, as David pointed out, in a culture that almost idolizes individualism and egoism, I think it's really easy for us to isolate and to become indifferent and to put ourselves in a bubble. You know, we're actually told to go into physical bubbles. We see the NHL in a bubble, but we must never allow our hearts to be put in a bubble. And we must never think that it's somebody else's job to look after our brother's keeper. That's not something that can be simply delegated. That's an onus that falls on all of us as Christians. So I'm just really hopeful that we're going to be able as a church to meet this moment, to think beyond ourselves and to think of others. And quite honestly, to even go beyond, you know, thinking of us and then others, but to go one step further and actually try to erase the lines that create the other, so that there is no other anymore, right? There's just us. And to really bring to life that kind of statement that's almost become a little bit trite now, but that we truly are in this all together. So, yeah.
Anyone else like to comment?
I think I'm taking Sister Alinda's mother, but she's our mother too, saying how we see the face of Jesus in each person around us. So if we relearn this and look at these faces again, all of these faces being the face of Jesus, and then how would I serve Jesus if I had the chance? So that would be something that I would have relearned, let's say, from this pandemic.
Thank you.
We as the church, we really have to see as now just Cathy said, we must see the face of Jesus in every person. So we will not set them anybody apart. Everyone must feel that they are loved and cared by each of us at the church. We are the church. So we must be that first person to show the kindness of Jesus to every person.
Thank you, Sister. So that brings our panel discussion to a close. I'd really like to thank you, Cathy, David, Sister Alinda, Troy, and Patrick for your conversation and insights today, and for the work that you do to strengthen and contribute to our Catholic community. Today's session is just a beginning. However, our bishops encourage all of us to hold similar reflections in our homes, schools, workplaces, and in society in general. Reflection guides prepared by the bishops, complete with questions to ponder, and recommended readings on today's topic can be found at www.grandinmedia.ca. If you would like to provide the bishops with comments or feedback on this topic or on any of the themes that are related to the pastoral letters, Please note there is also a feedback option on the website, and we'd love to receive your thoughts there. I would like to remind everyone to join us again next week for a reflection on the importance of the family during this pandemic time. And again, thank you to our panelists. I know that I'm going away with lots to think about and reflect on and to grow in my walk of faith. So thank you so much. Please join me in our concluding prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Almighty and eternal God, our refuge in every danger, to whom we turn in our distress, in faith we pray. Look with compassion on the afflicted, grant eternal rest to the dead, comfort to mourners, healing to the sick, peace to the dying, strength to healthcare workers, wisdom to our leaders, and the courage to reach out to all in love, so that together we may give glory to your holy name. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever.
Amen.
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 In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bonnie.
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 And thank you to Grandin Media.
Bye. God bless.